Alright, so this is Kiki. This is my first time doing one of these videos, so please bear with me. This will be over the introduction to renal clearance. So here are your objectives. You can read through them. I'm not going to read through them for the sake of time. So renal clearance versus total clearance. So usually, and this should make sense, that the total clearance of a drug is equal to the hepatic clearance of that drug plus the renal clearance of that drug. And so then what does the renal clearance equal? So renal clearance equals the fraction excreted unchanged in the urine times that total clearance. So looking at renal blood flow is about 20 to 25% of the cardiac output. And then renal plasma flow is not really important, it's just there for your knowledge. So the glomerular filtration rate, or clearance, that's the important part. So GFR is equal to 10% of that renal blood flow. So that's about 125 to 150 mLs per minute. For your purposes, we'll use 125, I believe. So the renal blood flow, I guess, why is that important? So the drugs coming or getting to the kidneys through the blood. So the blood flow has to take the drug to the kidneys in order for it to be cleared. So that's why clearance of the kidney is dependent on blood flow. So there's 3 different processes that your kidney uses with drugs. So the first to actually remove drug from the body, and that's filtration is the first one. So that's when it actually goes through your glomerulus and it just gets filtered out. Active secretion, and I'll go into these a little bit more on a couple other slides, but active secretion, it has enzymes that will actively pull drug out of the blood into your proximal tubule, and that's how it removes the drug. And then there's one process that returns drug to the body, and that's reabsorption. So in your distal tubule, there are those channels that reabsorb drug from the kidney tubule back into the blood. So that actually decreases clearance. So looking at this equation, renal clearance equals clearance from the GFR plus the clearance of that was secreted times 1 minus the fraction or the amount that's reabsorbed. So that should also make sense just from a math perspective. So once again, going a little more into those 3 different processes. So filtration depends on the glomerulus and that renal blood flow. So it's actually how well are your kidneys working. That's what filtration is dependent upon. So once again, then secretion has those enzymes that will pull drug from the blood into your proximal tubule. And then reabsorption is those channels that pull the drug out of the tubule into the blood. So all drugs are filtered, and then they either go through secretion or reabsorption. It's very rare that drugs have both. So how do you determine if it's secreted or reabsorbed? So if the clearance renally of that drug is greater than the GFR clearance, it means it's secreted. So you're getting what you should expect of a drug from your kidney function is a lot higher than what you're getting. So why is that? Because it's getting funneled from the blood into your proximal tubule by those enzymes. For the same reason, if your renal clearance is less than what you expect, there has to be a reason for that. So that means that drug is getting filtered into the tubules, but it's getting reabsorbed back into the blood. So you're getting a less amount in the bladder than what you expect. And then that's just kind of what that equation shows, is how to get that E ratio, to show if you have secretion or reabsorption. So going into a little bit more detail about filtration clearance. So renal clearance models hepatic clearance a little bit, and I'll explain how. But all clearance is equal to Q times E, and Q is the GFR, and then E is the fraction unbound. So the clearance of the glomerulus, or filtration clearance, is the GFR times fraction unbound. So it's passive because it depends on blood flow. It's not an enzyme that's pulling this drug. It solely depends on blood flow to bring the drug to the kidneys. And then it's restrictive because only the free drug can get cleared. If it's bound to albumin or it's bound to another giant protein, that's not going to get cleared by the kidney. It's too big. And then all drugs are filtered. So this is fairly straightforward for the filtration clearance. So now going into the tubular secretion. So all clearance is the GFR times fraction unbound, or Q times E. So then with tubular secretion, you can see the equation. So this should look fairly familiar to you. It's the exact same as hepatic clearance. So Dr. Earl told me you guys should know it, and I shouldn't have to explain it very much. If you don't get it, ask on Tuesday in class. This should also look very familiar to you. It's the same thing. So Tmax is the capacity, the number of active secretion sites available, and then KTS is just your K. So it's the concentration at which half of the secretion sites are available, so at half Tmax. Once again, this should look very familiar to you. So the only kind of difference thing with tubular secretion sites is acids compete with acids and bases compete with bases. So if you have an acidic drug that gets goes through secretion and you add a basic drug to it, they're not affected by each other. Only when you have an acid with a lower K and you add that to another acid does it differ. I hope this makes sense. These videos are very hard to do because I can't see your guys' faces at all to get any kind of feedback of whether what I'm saying makes sense to you or not. So I'm sorry. So now, tubular reabsorption. This one's fairly easy as well. It's a passive process. So now you have to look at the drug components. So it needs to have a high lipophilicity in order to be reabsorbed. And why is that? Because it has to go through those membranes. It has to go through the kidney membranes in order to get reabsorbed. So that has high lipophilicity. It has to be uncharged. If it's charged, it won't go through the membrane. And then there has to be a concentration gradient. With all reabsorption and with all passive processes, there has to be a concentration gradient to power that, to make those molecules move a little bit. So adjustment in renal impairment. So this is a bit of an example case. So why don't you guys try to work through it? Because I don't know how to write on here to show you what to do. But why don't you guys write through that, or work through that, and then we can talk about it on Tuesday. So how do you guys dose in renal failure? So you have to approximate the clearance of your patient. So drug info, so there's a normal clearance T and FE. So then you have to now apply the patient information to that information. So creatinine clearance, you guys should have all seen this already. So 140 minus age times ideal body weight divided by serum creatinine times 72 for males. And then with females, it's that same equation times 0.85. And so the reason why we use creatinine as an indicator is because it goes through filtration and it's not it's not secreted or reabsorbed. So it really gives us a good understanding of how those kidneys are working by themselves without any other processes. And it's also indigenous. So we're not actually giving you a drug to then tell how much of it comes out in your urine to figure it out. It's naturally found in your body and it's fairly easy for us to measure. So determine your patient's clearance. So the little star next to the creatinine clearance is your patient-specific clearance. So in order to calculate the renal function of your patient, you're making a ratio back to that 120 milliliters per minute that is patient population based. So you're taking your specific patient's creatinine clearance and you're dividing it by what the average patient of that size, his creatinine clearance is to get the renal function. So then you can see the equation how to calculate clearance. And then here's CSS average, CSS target. So as you can see, those little stars mean that you're using your patient-specific information. And then T half-life. And that is all.